Yes, guys, how you doing? Welcome back to the Spurs Talk Show for your second show of the day. I hope you're all locked in and keeping yourselves happy and healthy doing the things you love. I've got a new channel guest making his debut on the show. I've been very, very much looking forward to working with this man for the longest time. In my absence over the last year, I have seen this guy thrive and flourish, working with a bunch of bigger channels and just doing his own thing. He's also a comedian as well as a very articulate and incredibly intelligent Tottenham fan, and we are very welcome, very, very happy to be able to introduce you guys. If you haven't heard of him already, I'm sure you have, but it's Barnaby Slater. Welcome to the show, Barnaby. How you doing, mate?
Yes, so good. This should be the best time of any Tottenham fan's life, just before a cup final, just before the potential for it all to go awry. So this kind of, I remember particularly the kind of 2-3 weeks before the Champions League final just being like absolute glory. And I'm trying to enjoy this in the same way, but hoping for a different outcome, obviously.
Are you going to the game? Are you making your way out there tomorrow or anything?
I'm not. And I'll tell you why I'm not, because I didn't want to jinx it by booking tickets early. And then what happened, because I did go to Madrid for the Champions League final, and what happened was through a company I was working for at the time, I got a ticket at the last minute. Just like literally a phone call came into the office saying, "You're a Spurs fan, aren't you? Do you want to go to the final?" I was like, "Yeah." So I've kind of been waiting in the naive hope that something similar might happen again, and it hasn't. And then obviously the price is now, there is a part of me still tempted to just like drive in a car, like drive there and just go to the fan park or whatever. But the price of even like getting the car on the Eurostar now is pretty huge. So I think I'm going to be in a boozer in London Bridge with a lot of Spurs fans.
Sensational. Yeah, I took the other path to you. Is in January I decided I just think that it's worth having a crack. And as it sort of transpired, so I booked the ticket. I bought the ticket before obviously knowing if we were going to get there or anyone else. And then I booked my flights and the hotel. And I still had to pay like decent money for all of them. It wasn't cheap even back then. And everyone was calling me mad. You're a lunatic. Tottenham aren't going to get there. Look at our season. And I just had a feeling that we would. And then when we got Bodo in the final or in the semi-final, I was like, I don't really care anymore. If Tottenham don't make it, I'm still going to be there because those Norwegian ladies are so lovely that I'm still going to go out there and see if I can find myself a Helga. But it turned out that Tottenham got there anyway. So, I'm looking forward to it. But yeah, so it's cost a pretty penny. And I feel for
did you get a match ticket? Okay.
I've paid for it and I've been getting communication with the company, etc. But I've set up the app according to what they've asked, but they haven't actually sent the ticket through yet. So, but they did say it would arrive within 48 hours, and we're about 50 hours away from the game. So
I've read some stuff about QR codes not being turned on unless you're in the vicinity and stuff like that as well. I don't know.
Right. Yeah. Yes. God.
Good luck, Sean. That's what I'm saying.
Listen, if I get out there and it doesn't work, it will still be an experience, still be a story,
Yeah,
so,
exactly.
It is what it is. It is what it is. Mate, let's start off with the game, obviously, right? It's a massive, massive night. Everything, we said it, I'm sure you've said it on your channel as well. I think we've all been saying it for a couple of weeks now that the stakes couldn't be higher. It is a sliding doors moment, not just for Tottenham, but for Manchester United as well. There are, I think there is a new world order emerging in football with the threat of newcomers into the mix. And, not to get sidetracked into the finances of football, as we spent a long time talking about that this morning. But, I think that a lot of the clubs, maybe not so much Tottenham, but a lot of the other clubs are set up structurally to expect Champions League revenue. Mm-hmm. And there's usually only 5 teams, maybe 6 that are battling it out for 4 places. Next season, there could be 8 teams that are battling out for these places. And you can make the argument quite convincingly that the team that doesn't win tomorrow night or Wednesday night may be left behind because the ramifications financially, the ability to protect the player, to keep the players that you have, to attract the players that you need, to attract a new manager, maybe for both teams, is so obviously, drastically sort of up in the air depending on the outcome. So not just for the trophy duck, but how important do you see Wednesday night being for both of these two teams?
Well, I think there's an argument to suggest that both teams kind of Champions League wise have already been left behind. Like Spurs haven't been in the Champions League for what, three seasons? I don't know, 3-4 seasons, whatever it is. And it doesn't look like, I mean, I know we came 5th last season, but based on the trajectory of the second half of last season and the form under Ange, then you wouldn't say that we've looked like a Champions League team anytime in the last 18 months. Do you know what? Listen, it's a really good question, but I just want to say one thing, which is where I see the real difference between Tottenham and Manchester United in this situation now. And I can sum it up by the fact that I just got a text from a really good friend of mine, one of my best friends, who now lives in Scotland, but he just happens for the day on Wednesday to be down in London. And he asked me, he said, do you want to watch the game together? And I was like, it blew my mind. And I literally replied to him. I said, this here is the perfect example of where these two clubs differ when it comes to this Europa League final. You know, you can add that to Amarim's barbecue at the training ground if they win it, the lack of an open-top bus parade. This, to Spurs, I think, and the Spurs fan base, is all about the trophy. So, you know, the financial ramifications and Champions League and getting left behind is important, and I will go into that. But in terms of where I think Tottenham can go into this for almost the first time in my lifetime, thinking, actually, we do have a motivational edge. We do have an intensity edge, because I think the players and the manager, in terms of the messaging and the fan base, are all totally together. Whereas within Manchester United, there does seem to be, and you can get this from even some of the punditry from the likes of Neville and Rooney and Keane and whatever, there seems to be a bit of a malaise, a bit of an apathy about it. And I just desperately hope that all transfers and shows itself within the kind of body of the stadium and the game, and almost like the ether. And I know this is ridiculous, because this brings me back to, I mean, I've already shown I'm superstitious by telling you that I refuse to book tickets in advance. But I do think, in a weird way, without getting all woo-woo on you, I do think that this stuff does matter. And that is why I personally think that there is a bit of a difference within the fan base this time. Whereas when we went to Madrid for the Champions League final, I think it was more like hope rather than expectation. But this time I do feel like within the Spurs fan base, and almost within the club as well, there does seem like there's a little bit of a, like, we can do this and we're going to do this. And I really hope, obviously, that comes off. And I desperately hope that we don't find some kind of embarrassing, unlucky way to lose this from a position where, you know, one of those things where we dominate the game but find a ridiculous way to lose it, like Romero getting sent off or whatever. Anyway, to go back to your original question and getting left behind, it does feel a bit like this is one of the worst periods of time where Spurs could have chosen to take on their difficult, painful rebuild, as Maurizio Pochettino famously said. Because, listen, I have said it on my channel. It doesn't seem... There are two ways of looking at this. It doesn't seem like, on paper, there's going to be an easy way of getting from 17th place and losing pretty much every week this season to then starting next season really well and really easily, even if it's under a new manager, because we have all these young players. We do, I personally think, have a bit of a lack of leadership, certainly on the pitch, in terms of players who are willing to take games by the scruff of the neck and say, oh, we're in a hole here and we need to drag our way out of it. Except for in the Europa League, where I feel like Romero is kind of doing that a little bit. I think he desperately wants to sign off with a win. And I also think it's to our benefit that he's never lost a final. He's won a World Cup. He's won 2 Copa Americas, and he will want this really badly. And I think that will either go one way or the other in the final, which will be he will drag us over the line or he will get himself sent off. I can hardly see a middle ground. But in terms of this being now the painful rebuild, and like you mentioned, Daniel Levy being the poster boy for financial fair play and for running clubs sustainably, it does feel like it's getting to a point of, and I don't want this, but when it comes to the Premier League, if you can't beat them, join them, in terms of state ownership, in terms of being run by a group of people who you just don't want to be associated with. And yeah, like I was kind of alluding to there, I do fear that it will be a difficult turnaround for Spurs next season, whatever happens, including if we win the Europa League, but certainly a lot harder if we don't. The only caveat to that is, and what people seem to not mention a lot when they talk about, because a lot of people in punditry at the moment talk about, oh, you can't turn around a momentum and you can't turn around a sinking ship and whatever. But Unai Emery did go into Aston Villa and pretty much overnight turn around a dire situation that Steven Gerrard had got them into, relegation fodder, to now being a Champions League club, and probably 2 seasons in a row in not very long at all. So if you can appoint the right manager, it can happen, but I think they have a lot more senior players. They have a lot more senior players and physicality. And I think they brought on, is it Monchi, their sporting director, the guy from Seville? They brought him on board as well. And he is a clever a clever sporting director. So in answer to your question, I think it is going to be difficult, but I hold hope that maybe we can do it.
So we'll press pause on the Manchester United game, on the game itself, for a minute. We're going to come back to the tactics and how we're going to go about that, the team selection, because I don't think Tottenham fans can agree on the front four. I think most people can agree on the back sort of seven. But then after that, it gets a little bit kind of, people start playing around with new formations to try and shoehorn players in that they want to see. We'll come back to all that in the second half. Just sort of working with what you've just said there with regards going forward, with or without the money, with or without the Champions League, the Champions League and the trophy. I'd love to get your take on just sort of briefly where the problems have been this year. Do you hold the sort of the Premier League form? Do you share the kind of apathy and the resentment that some people hold towards our owner as responsible for it, for not backing the managers, or in previous incarnations for not giving this guy enough senior players? You mentioned that there's no leadership on the pitch, not enough physicality. Is it the squad that's not good enough? Is it the tactics? Do you think that Ange Postecoglou, with some better recruitment, would be able to fight on multiple fronts next year if we were to win the Champions League? And is he your guy either way? Like, would you like to see him still remain in certain circumstances or conditions, or would you like to see him be moved on?
I'll start with the kind of second part of the question, which is Big Ange. I have to stick to what I've said all along. I'm desperate for it to work for Big Ange Postecoglou. I like him. I think like I said earlier, his messaging is really good. I think he clearly knows how to motivate players. He's a brilliant orator. But and I think this is a commonality with most Spurs fans. I think a lot of Spurs fans desperately wanted it to work. Most of us, we were all singing the song and we were all with it from the start. But the problem for Big Ange is that we concede the same goal time and time and time again. And I personally don't think that is down to the fact that we don't have good enough players. I think it's been down to stubbornness. And the way I know that is because he has changed it in the Europa League in the knockout stages. He's made us more pragmatic. He's stopped Porro and Udogie from inverting as much and from being caught ahead of the ball as much. I mean, in all of those, certainly in both semi-final legs and the Frankfurt quarter-final legs, the opposition were time and time again trying to do what Premier League teams have done all season to get in behind us, which is knock it over the top of Porro's head or set us up down each side to get a 2-on-1 against the fullbacks, get a cross in, and then they score at the far post, which is the goal we have conceded under Big Ange time and time again. And for me, it's just been, I've been doing watch-alongs and laughing when we've been conceding goals because you know what's going to happen. And and this is the Premier League. So, the analysts for opposition clubs have just been having a field day and just been saying to their players, just do this, and they won't keep a clean sheet. And then if you get the first goal, then just make the game bitty, make the game scrappy, get in their faces, be physical, and they won't turn it round. And it's happened time and time again. And it's been that kind of stubbornness, in my opinion, in the Premier League that will lose Ange his job no matter what happens. That really, to me is a problem. And I do think it's a shame because actually, I don't look at the way we play in the Europa League and think it's like Jose ball. I don't think it's like Conte ball. I personally think it's what we've been asking from Ange the whole time, which is give yourself what's the right way of saying it? It's like you have to give yourself permission to be able to play your football by battling it out with the other team, tactically, physically, by showing them you're in a game and making yourself tight and hard to beat. If you concede a goal in the first 5 minutes in every game, then that's out the window because then you're having to chase the game in a way that really suits most Premier League oppositions. Premier League clubs love playing on the transition. They love hitting teams on the break. But if Ange had been a little more pragmatic in the Premier League from, say, the middle of last season, then we would have got top four last season because we would have scored the first goal in games more often. Teams would have come out at us. And that's when the Ange ball can really work, when you can then open those teams up on the transition. And that is what's really frustrated me. So that, in my opinion, is why Ange will lose his job. I think it will be a shame to see the back of him. Like I said, I really like him. He might go out with the biggest mic drop of all time. I desperately hope he does. And look, when he gets the sack, Well, the thing that I've been saying, and I really hope kind of happens, is he wins it. He does an interview on the pitch and he says, "I'm resigning." That will be the biggest mic drop of all time. He deserves that opportunity. And if it doesn't happen on the pitch, if it happens in a meeting with Daniel Levy, I hope that Daniel, if I'm talking about hypothetically, if we win the Europa League, I hope that Daniel Levy says to him, "You can say you resigned if you want, and you can still have your money because you've won us this trophy. You keep your bonus and you keep the payoff for the last year, and you can say you resigned because we think you're great. It's just not worked out, and I want this to go the way that you deserve." Okay, so I hope that happens. And then I think we'll all think of Ange Postecoglou the way we think of Keith Birkinshaw. People don't remember that when in '84, when we won the UEFA Cup, or what was the UEFA Cup, now the Europa League, I think we came 16th that season as well. But everybody looks back at Keith Birkinshaw as like, "Oh, we let him leave," and he said, he's wrongly quoted to have said there used to be a football club back there because Irving Scholar was the chairman, and there was lots of business stuff going on, and Irving Scholar was a bit of a shady dealer, it turned out. But Ange will be looked on as a legend, and rightly so. But like I said, if he loses his job, it will be because it's just been too obvious for all. Listen, to put it simply, if I can see what the problem is on the pitch and I'm no tactical genius, then there's a problem.
Yeah, I don't disagree at all. For what it's worth, I'd go a little bit further than you with regards like I used to love him. I used to sit there on a Monday being resentful about what happened on the weekend. Tuesday, we'd hash it out. Wednesday, I'd be kind of, okay, let's move on. Thursday, I'd listen to the press conference and I'd fall back in love with him again because of his ability to put the right words in the right order to justify things. And I think I gave him too much rope because eventually I feel like, it was almost a fool me once, fool me twice method. And I feel like these days, now I see a guy who doesn't like being asked difficult questions. I feel like sometimes his desire to justify his own mistakes and to take credit for things that certainly aren't his to take credit for. For example, the Jed Spence revival as an example. I start to go, well, what are we doing here? Is this guy just a brilliant salesman? But even great salesmen, once you realize that they're a salesman, you stop believing their bullshit, if that makes sense. And,
of course, yeah.
And I started to kind of see through it, and it became very transparent to me that he then ran out of excuses. Then he would turn to analogies that would give him an indefinite stay of leave. The 101st hit of the Stonecutter thing is an example that gives him as much rope as he could possibly want. And whenever you sack him, we weren't at the 101st hit yet. And after that one expired, then it became indignancy towards a journalist saying, well, if you can't see that there's a massive difference between what we're doing in the Europa League and the Premier League, just go and write your articles. I felt that he became disrespectful, and I felt like I think it's clear to me that he knows that the writing is on the wall regardless. And look, I am empathetic and sympathetic to his plight with injuries, but I do think as well that he did build this squad, and the B team or the rotation is nowhere near as bad as we had under Conte, and we had injuries under Conte. It's nowhere near as bad as the teams of the 90s and early noughties before Redknapp came in and started to then push us into better levels. And we never finished as low as he did in the league. And throughout that period, we have managed to do things in Europe as well and fight on multiple fronts. So this notion that we can't fight on two fronts, I think is just silly. And if it's true, if he genuinely believes it, then I think what you can infer from that is that if he was to be here next season, then for us to have any chance of going deep in any competitions, any cup competitions, you should expect nothing more than a loss against some very weak Premier League opposition, which isn't acceptable for a team like Tottenham Hotspur. We're a £3.75 billion company, allegedly, or a football club. I think you have to start acting like that, and everyone needs to pull their weight and stop looking for to exercise their demons via misaccountability or excuse merchants.
Yeah, I don't disagree with any of that. The one thing, and listen, I love playing devil's advocate. It comes out of me. I don't mean it to, but it's like the one thing that Ange has going for him that no other manager at Spurs, and I doubt any other manager in the Premier League would be able to get to this place, is somehow he has managed to keep the players on side. And the way I look at, I agree with everything you said, and especially, the way he speaks to female reporters is absolutely disgusting, I have to say.
I hadn't noticed that. Is that legit? Is it okay?
Yeah, and he's not the only Premier League manager to be like that. You can see that there's kind of a slight old boys club element to it, but it's like he treats them with utter disrespect. Their questions are like, the scum of the earth, and he's a bit like that with all reporters, to be honest. But he's a bit without the success, obviously, but he is a bit Alex Ferguson-like in the way that he deals with the press. He absolutely, he clearly hates doing it a little bit. And then, and he is in a better mood, admittedly, kind of pre-game rather than post-loss. Of course he is. But he has managed to keep the players on side. And his argument probably would be, oh, well, I have to deflect. I'm constantly having to deflect to keep them on side. And so on that level, I guess the ends could be seen to justify the means, but he has to win this game for that not all to come crumbling down on him and for him to be seen as the worst manager in Tottenham's modern history. Now, the thing you said, the only thing I have to slightly disagree with is it's not a full disagreement, but it's like you say, we have battled on two fronts previously. If you take out the Pochettino years, which of course were the best years of all, we've had many years where we've been in the UEFA Cup and we've never managed to get to the semi-final, let alone the final. So I think Ange would be able to say, oh, well, since that Ipswich game in February, I realized that basically I cannot play Micky van de Ven and Christian Romero in league games, other than I think the Chelsea game, which they started together in, because if they get injured, we'll go out of Europe. And I have to say that has worked. I'll ask you the question, Sean. Do you think we would have got to the Europa League final if either of them had been injured for any of our knockout games? Because I don't. I personally think, just to add a bit of context, I personally think Van de Ven being in the team ups us by about 30%, genuinely, in terms of as our ability on the pitch.
Obviously, I think there's a big difference between Micky van de Ven and having Archie Gray shoehorned in, or Ben Davies. I've always thought that Ben Davies is dependable. He doesn't wow anybody. He's never going to be a man of the match, but he doesn't really let you down too often. Mm-hmm. And for what it's worth, I think that Kevin Danso has been a very, very useful acquisition. I do really like him. Obviously, Radu Dragusin being out for several months is another kind of thing that people overlook and forget. So every opinion that I have, sometimes I sound like it's black and white. Certainly is, and I always try my best to bake in the context of the variables that I think are necessary. But what I would say that Micky van de Ven is a useful tool to get us out of trouble. I think he's almost like a wrench, or like a jack for your car that can, when you break down, when you've got a flat tire, you need him to be able to get you out of trouble. Where I don't think that Micky van de Ven is world class at low block defending. I don't think he's fantastic in the air. I think his positional play can be very susceptible when the ball's getting whipped in, especially when it's like an in swinger from the left hand side. I think he's incredibly susceptible, and his timing and his positioning can be bad. So I think Kevin Danso is much better at doing that. What I would say is, to your question specifically, against Frankfurt, I think that Romero was remarkable at nullifying Ekitike, right? I think he was absolutely sensational in that role. And once you took him out, and then Goetze had gone off the pitch, injured in the 12th minute, I essentially think that Frankfurt essentially lost all of their creativity, and then it was all down to Ekitike, and Romero basically kind of snuffed it out. So I take the point that we are much better, and the stats back it up over a 2-year period, that when you play the back five as Udogie and Romero and Van de Ven and Porro with Vicario behind it, then we have a 75% win rate over 2 years, whatever it is. So I definitely take the point. However, I feel like in the systems that we've played where we have progressed in Europe, Micky van de Ven's presence might be an amplifier, a multiplier of confidence and the value and all those things. And I definitely wouldn't argue with that. But the system and the structure that we've employed to get through those games, I don't think necessarily has played to Micky van de Ven's strengths. And so I would make the argument that we probably would have had a similar outcome if you'd played Ben Davies, because I think that he is just as good a defender in that low block model as Micky van de Ven is, in my opinion. I think Micky van de Ven's obvious strength is his ability to carry the ball out. He's a wonderful runner with the ball, and obviously getting back and getting us out of trouble is his kind of his AAA rating for me.
Yeah, I mean, listen, it's all totally subjective, and I basically disagree. I think there was that one chance away at Frankfurt where they were winning on goal, and he had to turn on the afterburners, and nobody else would have been able to do that. But you also just got to the point that I was going to make right at the end there, which is where I think Van de Ven really elevates us as well as just having that pace on the recovery. Is very often you will see he will feint to kind of pass it outside or go back to Romero, and then allow the pressing striker to come to him and then just knock it past him. And then that takes out almost at least one, but sometimes two pressers. and allows us to get into more positive positions up the field and start attacks or keep the ball in positions where I think some of those other players are just not as confident on the ball. And even when he's not doing that, I think because those pressing players know that he can do it, it makes them press in a different way that allows us to play a better, I was going to say better style, but a way of playing football that allows us to keep the ball better than we do otherwise. Because otherwise it's very one-dimensional when we don't have those two at centre back. Because as you know better than anyone, and as you were saying about Romero's performances, his ability to thread the eye of a needle with those passes between the lines means that the opposition team don't know what's going to happen, so they have to defend in a different way. And with him then alongside Van de Ven, knowing that he can beat them around the outside, or as well as playing a great ball 100%. Out to the wide left player, it just enables us to play in a totally different way that I think almost frightens the opposition into having to defend a different way as well. I'd put that as a reason up there as much as the recovery running. And I would agree with you, though. We've played 10 yards deeper at least in those Europa League knockout games, which is like I said earlier, frustrating because and actually I will say this, I enjoyed watching that Aston Villa first half the other night because I was like, oh, suddenly Ange, you're willing to set them up in a way where they just don't want to get beaten. And watching Micky Moore play in this bizarre inside right/right back formation with Spence very often ahead of him, I was like, oh, well, actually, Ange, if you'd just done this without playing Van de Ven and Romero from, February or November or whenever, then we'd probably have 20 more points.
Yeah, well, yeah. So that's the kind of the gimme for me. So you asked the question around would we be in the Europa League final if it wasn't for those two guys? I definitely take the point, and for what it's worth, I did forget about the tackle that Van de Ven put in the early stages of that game. And if we go 1-0 down in that moment, then it's a whole different kettle of fish. So it's a fair point, and it's a good one, well made. And I definitely share your take that the on the ball value of those two playing together is incredible. I think that there isn't a better passer of the ball in the centre back role in the Premier League than Romero. I think that if his absence in our system next year, if it's true that he leaves, will probably be more felt on the ball than without it. Because I don't think. Again, I don't want to be harsh on him because I think he's the best defender we have, but I don't think he is world class at defending like his accolades and his titles would suggest. But if we can get great money,
he's no Van Dijk, is he? It's fair to say he's no Virgil van Dijk. Yeah,
100%. But he's on the ball stuff, and Micky van de Ven, that's like kind of yin and yang. One of them wants to pass it, one can drive with it and create things. It's certainly worth its weight in gold. But specifically, I think the quality of the opposition, with the exception of Frankfurt, and even then. Frankfurt, when they lost Goetze in that second leg, I think they were a little bit numb. Apart from that, I think it hasn't been tough. A lot of people, and I'm not moving the goalpost because I did say that you can only play what's in front of you, and a lot of people were like, don't write off Bodo. They're a very strong outfit. And then when they weren't a very strong outfit in the game, everyone said, well, it's only Bodo. I said, well, you can't move the goalpost depending on the form because you can make the argument that we made them look bad. But I would make the argument that the Europa League standard is far weaker than the Premier League. And I think that you could probably look at maybe 8-9 teams that are in the bottom half of the table in the Premier League or from 9th down and think that 75% of them would also be able to handle most of that Europa League opposition. So I think that for me, it's not so much of an argument of would we have been able to have, would we have got through to the final if we weren't playing that back four? I'm not sure. We don't know. It's a different timeline of reality. But I think that the quality of the opposition, if most of those teams that we've come up against, if they were in some sort of Super League, they wouldn't be in the same league as most of the teams in the Premier League. And that golfing class has been surprisingly concerning for me. I didn't think that we would struggle and be walked off the park by Crystal Palace like we have done. Now they've gone on and won the FA Cup. But you could make the same argument against teams like Fulham this year. We've been outplayed at times. You could make the same argument against, everyone bar the bottom three. I think West Ham and possibly one or two others where we haven't really looked like the team that we used to be, and a team where you could look at that fixture list throughout the season and go, well, there should be 3 points there. There should be 3 points there. This season, it's been one of those. Well, I can't really think there's any easy 3 points anymore. And that's I guess where I'm worried about is. This squad doesn't to me, feel like it's 17th in the league by a country mile. Even the B team, and I hate calling it the B team, Barnaby, but even the players that are playing in our B team, a lot of those guys were kind of, were A-team players not that long ago, and they've had, they're successful players. This squad, by the way, is a squad that Ange has put together, right? He's bought 18 players. So for him to kind of make the argument that the B team can't compete at the Premier League standard, that's an indictment of his acquisition or the acquisition of Daniel Levy or the people that are making those talent ID decisions. If they're not good enough to compete, then why did we buy them, and why did we go so much towards the youth-centric model? And so that's where I worry is I look at that team, that squad that we have, and think if Ange wasn't here and Pochettino had that team, or Thomas Frank had that team, or Silva, or Iriola, or Edin Terzic, or any of the other names we're linked with, I think we could still be in the Europa League final and also have a far better league season to write home about.
Yeah, I don't massively disagree with any of that. I just think I haven't looked at any of those Premier League games though and thought anything other than there's a lack of motivation and desire in the Premier League because the decision has been made, whether it's consciously or subconsciously. I mean, listen, I think we've read enough about from ex-managers and people who've worked at the club before to know that Daniel Levy is always absolutely transparent within the club about how important getting to the Champions League is. So to the point, so we all know that previously he has, we've all had a go at him about it. He doesn't care about trophies. He doesn't care about cups because they don't get you in the Champions League. That doesn't get you the riches. That doesn't get you at the European top table. So I personally think it's more than possible, and let's say still either consciously or subconsciously, that throughout the club they have known since November that their only way into the Champions League is via this trophy. And therefore, in terms of marginal gains, the drop-off in the Premier League games motivationally and in terms of intensity and in terms of the players not wanting to get injured because they know that it's all about the Europa League, 10%, 10%, and you only need a couple of percentage points to lose games. I mean, that Crystal Palace game, Palace are well-organised. I like Glasner. He's top of my list, to be honest. I really like him. Organised really well, good team, good individual players. But I don't look at them man-to-man throughout the squad and think they have better players than Tottenham Hotspur. I just think on that day and in most of these Premier League games, the players have been 10% less motivated and driven to be interested in those games.
Is that okay, though? Is that okay,
no,
Barnaby?
No, it's not okay.
As a fan of the football club, I mean, I was at the Crystal Palace game. Friends from another channel, Irish Hotspur, flew over from Seattle for it. I met some ladies from South and some men from South Korea. They spent thousands and thousands of pounds to come and watch their team one game a season, and to be offered that, it's unprofessional, I think, from the players.
Completely, it's bananas. Listen, it's bananas. It's terrible, and it is. But if the end justifies the means, and that's why this is the maddest game of all. Every year they talk about the playoff final being the richest game in football. I think this is not only the richest game in football, but it's like the biggest, like you said earlier, sliding doors moment potentially in modern English football history.
For both clubs, I think.
Yeah, definitely for both clubs. But for Spurs, for you to be able to say it's either the best season of your lifetime or the worst season of your lifetime is completely mad. But Levy may well have stumbled upon his only way to win a trophy, which is to have almost allowed the players to take their eye off the ball so much in the Premier League that they can get to the final of this trophy. Now, if you go with that argument, though, you have to say that we're coming up against the worst possible team we could come up against in the final because it's the only other team in Europe in the same boat. Because, and this is where I would say, where I would agree with you in terms of the quality of the teams we played in the knockout of the Europa League. All the teams that we played in those knockout ties have had games that, the likelihood they're still fighting for the Champions League within their league tables. So we were the only team to play against them each game where we're like, oh no, this is more important to us than it is to you. And that's where those kind of marginal gains can really make a difference. Now we play against Man United and it's just as important to them as it is to us. Or at least it very much should be. Like I said earlier, I don't get the feeling coming out of the club that they're able to say that weirdly. They have to kind of act like, oh, this is just, it won't save our season.
Yeah. We're Manchester United. We're Champions League level. This is beneath us. We'll do it because we have to, but it's not really a big deal.
Yeah, which is almost like, it's almost like they're kind of going for this big scale lads, it's Tottenham vibe, and it might work in their
Sure.
favor. It might
Yeah.
work in their favor, and they might be right. They might be right, and will absolutely crumble under the pressure or weight of expectation of not having won a trophy for so long and not having won a European trophy for since 1984. But I personally, if I'm Ange Postecoglou, I mean, the amount of things I'd be pinning on the wall if I was Ange Postecoglou, but among the things I would be saying is, look at how Newcastle approached that Carabao Cup final against Liverpool. Nobody gave them a hope. Everybody talked about how they hadn't won anything for 50 years, 70 years, whatever it was. And they just went into that game and they physically, from the first second, absolutely bullied Liverpool. And I want Spurs to do the same. I want them to, from back to front, I want them to bully Manchester United whilst keeping, a really good shape, but just go into every tackle really hard and show them that the desire and the motivation is much, much higher than theirs. And if they do that, then I don't think Man United have the players to deal with it. And Liverpool showed, and they do have the players to deal with it, that in that kind of situation, you can get overrun. I really hope, and I think Palace probably similar with Man City. They didn't dominate the possession, and I have no interest in Spurs dominating the possession. I actually think it could be one of the drossest finals of all time. I think a lot of people go in saying, "Oh, both of these teams can't defend. There'll be loads of goals." Unless there's an
nil written all over it.
Yeah, unless there's an early goal, unless there's a really early goal and it from a worldie or a set piece on one eye, and it brings the other team out. I think there's a high chance of it being a 0-0 and them both desperately wanting the opposition to have possession, because Spurs have shown in the knockout stages that's what works for us. And Man United, probably other than Spurs, are the club that most have trouble playing against teams who play deep block. They at Old Trafford, every single time the opposition, Brentford or Bournemouth or whoever it is, they play a deep block, they get in their faces, they make it bitty, they make it scrappy, and they score on the break, and then inevitably they score another 2 on the break as well. So I think both teams will be trying to make the other team
it's a hot potato, isn't it? No one wants the ball. I completely agree. I think it's got 0-0 written all over it. A stinkfest, maybe 1-0 in the second half. Just hope it is Tottenham. We've got a United fan come in to turn on his afterburners. Good to see you, Sam. Guys, just quickly, please do, before we continue the conversation, smash the like button if you're watching the video and you're enjoying the dialogue. Hit the subscribe as well if you're new here, and also make sure the link is right here for you guys, that you get over to Barnaby's channel at Barnaby Slater _. He puts out daily content and it's wonderful stuff. So if you're enjoying that, then please make sure you get over there and show your support and appreciation for him. Barnaby, before we get to the actual specifics of how we're going to shape up, though, I do just want to finish off the kind of the conversation with regards our ownership. We mentioned about I think we're both in alignment to some degree. Neither of us find it acceptable, but there has been a parking of priorities or a reprioritization as the second half has gone in a certain direction. But in so doing, we have sacrificed about £35 million, give or take, in merit points, in merit money, from finishing the difference between finishing 5th and 17th, which, Daniel Levy, as you correctly suggested, maybe he has stumbled into a method to get a trophy and get that monkey off his back, but he's a money guy and he's not going to be happy with the fact that even if we win this trophy, if there was no qualification into the Champions League, then the money from winning this trophy alone doesn't cover the losses in the traditional method of what we get in the merit points. And those merit points are given, or that merit money is given over immediately, right? So it's a cash flow boost. And Tottenham obviously have got the wherewithal. We have the ability from our commercial income to be able to withstand, one of these seasons where you're out again. But in terms of the narrative at the moment, at least around people like Stefan Borson, it's not so much about profitability, but cash flow certainly has been impacted. Obviously, if you do win the cup, then you get the Champions League money, which turns everything on its head. I just wanted to kind of get your vision for what you'd like to see in the summer. We both think that maybe Ange is going to be parting ways either. You mentioned you'd like Oliver Glasner. He likes to play a back three. I think you could definitely make the argument that our squad, at least from the back end of the pitch, the wing backs and the centre backs, could easily be transformed into a back three and not have too much disruption. But at the top end of the pitch, we have got we're quite heavy in the way in the method of kind of take on wingers. Maybe they're not all good enough, but we certainly have a lot of young players in that fit. If you were to see us move towards a Glasner model or another manager that would come in and play something like that more often than a back four, would you see more disruption then to the transfer strategy and how you'd go about navigating the summer? with who comes in, who goes out. What would you like to see in that regard? Where are your priorities? I guess is what I'm asking in the summer.
The manager. I mean, straight away, the way I look at the reason I say Glasner, obviously won the Europa League already at Frankfurt, done a brilliant job at Crystal Palace, so has the Premier League experience that clearly, based on the lists that are coming out of shortlisted managers, it's clear that Spurs are now looking for someone, they're looking for someone with Premier League experience again. A lot of people, I think, after Conte would say, oh, I don't want to see Spurs playing a back three. It was so boring. But I don't think that was necessarily about playing a back three. I think the problem under Conte eventually was once the kind of first 6 months of his kind of almost bullying ways in terms of his mentality, just his absolute 24/7. There was a documentary that I worked on back in the day when I worked for a football YouTube channel, where the quote that came out was him saying to his players, you have to eat grass, him talking about suffering all the time. I think once that all wore off, I think in the first 6 months, the players were like, this is amazing, we got a winner. And after 6 months, they were like, I cannot handle this guy anymore. So I personally don't think the back three or the 3-4-3 or the 3-5-2 or whatever it was is the issue. And I look at Glasner and I see that he plays, a very organized system, but he allows players who are flair players or are better off at doing their own thing than being stuck to a system. He allows them to play within the rigidity of that system. So that's why I like him, and I like his attitude. And he's clearly a good man manager. So that's why I like him. Listen, do I have any evidence to suggest he would want to leave Crystal Palace to come to Tottenham? I don't. You'd say back
I found an article. Funnily enough, I found an article. It was so strange. I was scouring the various. I've got this thing called I Know Reader, which everyone who's looking for various stories should definitely get it, and then set your it's like an RSS feed essentially, but it's very clever AI, and it scours the internet for various keywords. And this random article from a Austrian sports build basically came out, and I saw it, and within 5 minutes I was like, well, I've got to do a video about this before it gets out somewhere else. And it was his mentor, a guy called Rottinger, who's got a stadium named after him, who basically developed up Glasner to be the guy that he was. And he said in this interview in Austrian, it was translated, he said, no, the rumors were he's going to go to Leipzig in the summer. And his mentor said, no, from what I understand, he's going to land at Tottenham. Now that came out 2 days before the final. So of course I put out an article saying it's done, whatever, clickbait headline. But now that he's won the FA Cup, I don't know, maybe those things have changed, but there's certainly some evidence to suggest that someone close to the party, to the Glasner family or whatever, would say he thinks he's going to come to Tottenham. So something to get our teeth stuck into, maybe.
You can look at it both ways. One is that, Crystal Palace would want to make it very difficult if he said he wanted to leave, but I think it's more like, he's won them a cup, and if he said, I think this is as good as I can do here, thank you so much, you'd like to think that Steve Parish would be like, no, fair enough, as long as we get the money. In the same way as, like I mentioned with Ange, if he wins us a trophy, then, he can leave and with his head held high, etc., etc. But going back to kind of your question about, priorities this summer, and would a change of manager, for instance, a Glasner into a 3-5-2 affect the transfer dealings? I don't think so, because I think our transfer strategy now is pretty clear, which is young, exciting, talented players who can play with the ball at their feet, talented attacking players. But also, I think all of the players who come out of academies now can play to a system, depending on what the manager is. So I don't see that being a huge problem. I mean, I think it's likely that Scott Munn and Johan Lang might leave this summer as well. But I also think then Paratici will come in and that strategy will continue. There's certainly some talk that Munn will leave anyway, because Vinay is coming in, etc., etc. So I don't see that as a problem in terms of, firstly, will the players we have be able to change to a new manager? I don't see that as a problem. And actually, I think to some degree, take Archie Gray as an example. I thought he looked really excellent as a centre-back. Imagine how good he could look as a centre-back if he was playing in a system where he got some protection. Now, he might still say, oh, I'm a central midfielder and I'm just filling in there, to help out. But Gary Mabbott was a central midfielder when he joined Spurs all those years ago. And then it became clear that he was a better centre half. And it may just be that, for me with Archie Gray, and I think Windy from the Extra Inch said this, and I agree with him, I think he struggles to take it on the half turn. And I think to play in that kind of 6 or an 8 role in midfield, I mean, especially under Ange, you have to be scanning all the time. You have to be taking it on the half turn. And he's only young and he might learn it. But at the moment, he's not going to get any Premier League game time in central midfield, if you ask me. So
yeah, I don't disagree. I think that he's actually. I was really surprised. I didn't like the fact that he was finally given his chance in the 6 against Liverpool. I felt like it was a little bit of a bus throwing exercise. And but then he had another chance to do it at West Ham and he didn't grab it. And also at Palace, I think, or was it Villa? He hasn't grabbed it. And I agree with the reasons why you just mentioned. But if you do play a back 3, you're going to need one of those at the back to be able to be competent bringing the ball out. And if it's Van der Ven off the left, that's great. If it's if Romero's not going to be the passer in chief because he's out of here and we don't necessarily have the budget because of whatever's going on, I've crunched the numbers and I don't think that that's true. I think might be a narrative that's spun, but I don't get on board it. But if we decide that, you know what, Romero's gone, we've got Danso who's good enough for now, Vescovic we've invested in, we're going to wait and see with him. Plus we have Vescovic and Phillips, etc. So they're kind of okay in that department. Maybe they're not already yet. Then you're going to need someone who's very clever on the ball.
Do you sorry to interrupt, but do you think that Gay bid in January was real? Because I think that Gay bid was potentially them knowing that Romero's going and they're trying to future proof.
I don't know. I think a lot of people that say it's obviously just nonsense. I think there's a little bit of a kind of agendas at play there. People that want to hate the owner and to find any reason to say there's no truth to it. Anytime that why don't you show ambition? And when you demonstrate ambition that doesn't quite work out, well, then it wasn't real ambition in the first place, right? So, but look, assuming that it's true, because obviously, if the bid was, and Paratici said the bid was made, right? So, if it was made and it wasn't accepted, then but the intention was that it wasn't to be accepted, then Daniel Levy's rolling the dice because if the official bid came in and they said, okay, actually we'll take it, then Daniel Levy's got to pay the money, right? So. But let's assume that for a second that there was the intention, if it was negotiable or willing to be somewhere around there, then the notion now that Tottenham have to sell to buy can't be true because you had £70 million and that deal was done after the Matisse Tell deal was organised. So there was £70 million on paper at least available if Crystal Palace had said yes on deadline day. So again, where's that money gone? So that's one of the many reasons why I don't buy into for a second the fact that there's no money. Last year's revenues were only 5% down on the year before. And the year before we had Champions League revenue. We got to the last 16 stage and obviously went out under Conte. Last season, we had the fewest games in our club's history and the fewest matchday events and also not as many non-matchday events. Next year, we have doubling of the non-matchday events on paper. So there's so many reasons why there's money coming in. And so, yes, it's going to be, we might be cash or liquid temporarily, but so to answer your question directly, the Gay he bid, I think that there was some legitimacy to it. I don't personally think he's as good as everyone else does. I never have. I think he's got a clumsy gene in him. I'm not saying he's a bad player, but I just don't rate him. There's other players that I would rather have seen us go after. One of them was Jonathan Tah, but he's ending up probably going to Bayern Munich. But just to finish the point, I do think that Archie Gray, and I don't disagree with you at all, by the way, that some midfielders do end up getting pushed down. Like everyone starts out as a striker, right? Yeah. Archie Gray was 6 years old. He was 8 years old. He was a striker because he was obviously talented beyond his years. Yeah. And then they eventually get sort of shoehorned back as their development goes up. So there's no disgrace to being moved back into a centre-back role, especially if you need to replace someone who's a ball player who can pass the ball and run with it. And I think that Archie Gray probably has all of those skill sets. He just needs a bit more time, and in which he'll have that. Yeah. If he's playing in a back three model, because I agree with you about the half.
Yeah, he could be a wonderful kind of old school libero in the middle of two markers in a back three. And don't forget, when Pochettino, one of the things that I loved about Pochettino when he came in and it's really started happening for him was when he moved Eric Dyer into that defensive midfield role. And when we had the ball, Dyer would sit in between the two centre halves and pick the ball and get the ball off them and kind of spray it about. And you could kind of see Gray doing that kind of role in a back three if it was a back three. But anyway, look, I'm just using him as an example of someone who I think will benefit from a manager in future who doesn't leave him one-on-one all the time, frankly, no matter what position he's in. I think, this is where I'd say, look, Yves Bissouma is such a gifted footballer that he can deal with being one-on-one at the time, or he can deal with being pressed live out of him because he can take it on the half turn. I don't have a problem with Yves Bissouma in terms of the hard stuff in football at all. I have a problem with him and his concentration levels when he has to play a 5-yard pass. That's where he fucks it up. As far as I'm concerned, he is as gifted almost as Moussa Dembele without the kind of physicality. Right. But putting Archie Gray in that 6 role when he's being pressed to death and he's expected to take it off Vicario when Vicario is not able to pass it where the 6 needs it and it's always 2 or 3 yards the wrong side. He's not ready for that. He's just not ready for that. But I do think, he's shown me enough talent, as have a lot of these young players, for me not to be overly worried about how they will transfer to playing under whoever the next manager is. I mean, it's a bit of a weird situation. I mean, it's just all a weird situation, isn't it? But it's a weird situation where nobody can, I don't think any of us all have the same opinion on which manager should come in. It's so, there's nobody with like nobody who's just like, oh yeah, it has to be that person. Even Iraola, who I really like, even he's gone on a bit of a bad run and they're down in like 10th or 11th now. And you're like, okay, I'm not quite as sure about him.
When back in December, when everyone was talking about him and Bournemouth were flying high, I said, I'm not sold on that guy. I don't think that there's any, I think, he did okay in Spain, but he actually, there was time, I think it was with Valladolid. There were some really awful moments in that tenure as well. And I think that we're guilty sometimes of looking at managers who take teams that are perennially 15th and move them up to 8th or 10th and think that that is the same as moving a team from 5th to 3rd or 2nd, right? It's not the same thing. It gets harder as you go up because you're working with different resources, you're competing for different types of talent, and you have different expectations. And you're also, fishing in a pond where if you're a Tottenham Hotspur manager, you don't have the draw of consistently successful trophy hauls, whereas the teams that are around you, some of them because they've cheated or allegedly cheated in their past endeavours to get the success that they've had, like Chelsea and maybe City, but the others have just been historically more successful on a consistent basis. And so when they say to an agent, hey, we'd like your player to come here, yes, okay, cool, I'm there. Whereas Tottenham
I call them legacy. I call them legacy clubs. Legacy clubs, and where it really showed the most, it shows it. I completely agree with you, and I talk on my channel all the time about, when fans get so frustrated about why we're not buying him or buying him, it's because about 8 clubs in the world have to have not been interested in that player first for him to even be tempted to come to Spurs, because they pay more wages, they have better tradition, like they have more history. More legacy. And the place where the legacy club thing really showed itself to me was in Madrid for that Champions League final. Because, in the stadium, Spurs had as many, probably, or close to as many fans in there as Liverpool did. But outside the stadium in the city, my God, it was 98% red. And that is because of, the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, and all of the history of Liverpool Football Club. And Spurs, it was only in reality under Pochettino where suddenly we got to a position for the first time in decades where young fans who watch football on Match of the Day when they're kids and are like, who am I going to support, would look at Spurs and go, oh, I'm going to support them.
Yeah.
It's another reason why, to bring it back to kind of yours and my life, Sean, it's another reason why growing a Tottenham fan channel is always going to be much slower than growing a Man United fan channel, or unfortunately even a Chelsea fan channel, because 25 years ago, Chelsea suddenly became big overnight and won everything. And therefore there are loads and loads of Chelsea fans all of a sudden. Whereas if that had never happened, Tottenham would frankly be a bigger club.
I say this all the time, right? The people think I bang on about FFP and PSI, bang on about the inequality. People think, no, it's so unipolar. Daniel Levy is the root of our problems. He isn't. He might be the root of our internal problems. Maybe not, depending on your slice of accountability and if the buck stops at the top or if it's shared around decision makers, whatever. But for me, teams like Chelsea, Abramovich came in, and sorry for the guys in the chat because you probably heard me say this 1,000 times, but this may be the first time that Barnaby will have heard me say it. Like, I just think that the root cause of all the problems is finance and the inability to create rules that are enforceable, because Chelsea to this day are still benefiting from the misdeeds of their previous owner. Manchester City to this day, I know we don't know whether they're guilty or not, but let's assume that there's some level of misdeed within that 115 charges, some level of breaches of rules. Even though you've got all the resources in the world, even though you have the best talent, the brightest minds, the smartest minds in the room, fighting for in your corner in the legal battles, despite all of that, there is still an uneven playing field that you're working with to give yourself a little bit more of an edge that you don't already need anyway. And then from those things, you create trophies, and the legacy of those trophy wins create the brand for decades to come. So Tottenham, to this day, we missed out on Willian, and I'm very resentful about this, but he was in our training ground. He went to Chelsea because Abramovich said, how much, get him here now, do it. And that guy was player of the season in the year that Chelsea won their league. And he would have been a Tottenham player. Now, would Tottenham have won the league that year? Probably not. You don't know. It's a whole different timeline of reality. But Chelsea to this day can still pick up the phone and buy a young player because they know that they're going to a team that have a history of winning trophies. And a lot of those trophies came through in an era when there either were no rules to stop this stuff happening, or when the rules were happening, that guy who had all the money in the world and a different relationship with money decided to also engage in mechanics that would give him an edge. And I think that like people overlook that stuff. Like it's not just Tottenham that are a victim of that. Everybody else is too. When people say that Daniel Levy is the root of all, he's the reason why we haven't won a trophy. If that's the case, then where are Aston Villa's trophies? And is Daniel Levy responsible for them? How about Bournemouth? How about West Brom, Nottingham Forest, Leeds, Wolves, West Ham? All the teams that used to be relatively as successful as Tottenham were back in the 70s, 60s, 80s, and 90s, they haven't won anything either. So is Daniel Levy the root cause of all of their problems? He can't be. If it's not them, either there's a Daniel Levy in all of those clubs, or there is another factor, a bigger factor, which is unenforceable rules.
Well, Sean, listen, mate. I imagine you get as much abuse as I do sometimes, because I think we come from a similar place. Listen, it's quite simple for me. If Chelsea hadn't been bought by Abramovich, and if Man City hadn't been bought by Abu Dhabi, Spurs would have at least one Premier League title now. It's as simple as that. And when and listen, I have to always caveat this at the start by saying, listen, I'm not Daniel Levy in, and I'm not Daniel Levy out. My personal opinion is, would I like a situation where we can spend more of our money because we have the cash there? And would I like us to compete in the wages waters of those clubs above us? Yes. But do I feel confident that if Daniel Levy and ENIC sell the club, that the people who come in are going to be as careful with making sure that we don't go bankrupt or get relegated in the future? Because you named a number of clubs there, but actually in the time I've supported Spurs, the clubs that were rivals of ours when I started getting into it, Nottingham Forest, Aston Villa, two examples who won the European Cup just before I started supporting Spurs, they've been relegated and been down in the dumps numerous times. So 100%. The one thing you have to give ENIC and Levy is that they've stabilized the club and run it safely, so that won't happen under their tenureship. And even people might say, oh, we're 17th. Look, we're not going down. That's the reality. And I think they knew that.
That's a bigger problem though for me though, mate. Just quickly on that one. I was reading this article earlier. I was doing a show about it. It seems to me like money men primarily in private equity that want to get themselves a diversified portfolio looking at football, they now seem to think that there's very little relegation risk for most of the teams, right? The same three teams that come up go down, and consequently, there's even more appetite to get on board these things. But these clubs are looking for an entry point and an exit point before they even pick up the phone, right? They're trying to figure out what's the price to get in, and how do I get out, and when do I get out? And that doesn't really bode well for fans in the long run, but it does bode well for them. And where things bode well for them, there's interest. And to me, if you don't have the risk of relegation or relatively the risk of relegation, and then you don't have the threat to your revenues, and you have on the horizon the new Premier League rights deal that's 2028, 29, whatever it is, and the Netflix for sports is going to come in, which will triple their TV media money. I just think you're going to see a never-ending sort of train. It's the weather vane is sort of pointed in that direction, and I do worry. I think I asked this, and you gave a great answer in your first answer, which was if you can't beat them, join them, because you don't want to get left behind. We've all got moral kind of hazards or whatever. But at the same time, there's no such thing as a clean billionaire. Joe Lewis certainly isn't a clean thing. Just look into Patagonia, right? He's got a lot of skeletons in his closet. Listen, by the way, we could be talking about this stuff for hours. I've only got you for another sort of 15 or 20 minutes. So I'd love, hopefully we're going to do this on a regular, because everyone in the chat is really enjoying our conversation. For the last 15, though, I do want to pivot back to, unless you had a final thought on the conversation.
Well, just one more thing, which is that, like I was just trying to caveat that I'm not Levy or ENIC's biggest fans, but also, like I said, I'm nervous about what may come next, unless there's some guarantee that we're not going to, I'm not anti-relegation by any means, but what I mean is I don't see us ever getting relegated under Daniel Levy and ENIC. But what I would say is, and a lot of people will hate to hear this, but the reality is, in terms of what Daniel Levy and ENIC put together, which was the Northumberland Development Project over 20 years ago, Tottenham are well ahead of where Levy expected us to be at this point. With Pochettino, got us about 7 or 8 years ahead of the game, because Levy expected us to be in a position now that we're in the first, in the few years after the stadium build to start qualifying for the Champions League. Whereas actually we got well ahead of ourselves. And so there is an argument, and a lot of people won't like it, but there is an argument that Levy has done his job in terms of what he said he was going to do in terms of growing the club, building the stadium, and starting to try and regenerate the area. But because of the brilliance of Pochettino and what brought it forward, now the kind of expectancy around Tottenham is so huge. And 100%. I have to say, alongside the expectancy, a level of entitlement that I think is slightly naive. It means that we find it very difficult to accept where we are as fans. And I understand it, especially for the younger fans. It's the younger fans who've basically had the last 10 years of being laughed at because we're in the top 6, but we're the only team in the top 6 who've never won anything, and they all get laughed at school and whatever. So I get that, but there is an argument, and this is where I think older fans like me can kind of accept it a bit more, where you're like, well, actually, we are a much bigger and better club now than we were before. Just before you go into the Man United thing, I just want to ask you one question, which is related to Daniel Levy. Sure. How do you think it will change how the fans look at Daniel Levy if we win the Europa League? Or will it?
The online space, I think there'll be lip service paid to the moment, because I'll be holding those people to account who say that the buck stops at the top. I'm not someone that subscribes to this buck stops at the top. I think it's a lazy, regressive, and overly simplistic argument. I think that you're abdicating responsibility to those people that are very well paid and that are experts in various divisions if you're saying that everything is at the feet of Daniel Levy. However, so I don't do it that way. But those that do, I always say, in order for you to put together a consistent argument that I'll entertain, and this is where I've had loads of barneys with people over the last 3 years of doing this, but I say, I need to know then, if you think that everything that's wrong with the football club is at Daniel Levy's feet, then as to should everything that's right. And then I always get, well, what's been right? And I say, well, I've had a Champions League final. And to your point, just briefly, I've said it 1,000 times, it was the worst thing that could have happened to Tottenham Hotspur was to get to the Champions League final and lose it, because it fundamentally reset expectations. It's like buying a share price, buying a stock after an abnormal event that smashes the share price up 50%, and then you think that that's the new norm, and you buy it at the top, only to find out tomorrow that gravity takes hold and it comes back down to its normal levels and only slightly above it. And then you then forevermore resent that stock because you made the mistake of believing that that was the new norm. And I think that, as I say, if we won the Champions League, obviously it would have been fantastic. But getting there ahead of schedule, as you said correctly, and then losing it, fundamentally reshaped the expectations, at least in the online space. When I go to,
by Levy though, to go devil's advocate again, Levy was the one who suffered from naive expectations the most, because he suddenly went, "Oh, we made a Champions League final. I'm going to get a proven winner in," and that was idiotic.
Yeah. I mean, look, there's been many mistakes along the way, and Pochettino, for me, I've said 1,000 times, he would have been my guy. He was always going to be the guy after the guy before the guy, and I've always said that Ange was the guy. But before I knew who Ange was, when we lost Conte, I said whoever the next guy is, it's going to be too soon for him. He's going to inherit a bunch of kids, and the model's not quite there yet. So whoever it is will be the first stepping stone, hopefully, to a new philosophical norm of playing better football and getting back to our roots. But he won't be successful. So maybe he wasn't the guy before the guy. If he wins on Wednesday, maybe he'll be the guy. But I still believe that the next manager will have a better chance. And I was hoping it would be Pochettino. Turns out that, if he does okay in the World Cup next summer, then his availability won't be around until July, and we can't waste another summer waiting for the new manager to come in. So he might have to be the guy after. But for me, 100%. To answer your question, do I think that the fans will change their tune on Daniel Levy? I've just said, if you are someone that I've heard you over the last 2 or 3 years saying that the buck stops at the top, then if we win, I expect to see you giving credit where it's due, because otherwise you're being inconsistent, and that's logically unacceptable to me. I won't tolerate it. After having had the 3 years of banter that's been aimed at me, I will be holding you accountable. I don't personally think that the buck stops at the top. I think that he's indirectly responsible. Obviously, he hires the people that make the decisions, but I think that generally speaking, you have to hold people that are experts in their various divisions to their accountability as well.
Yeah, agree.
So I'll see. I think what will happen is there'll be well done, about time, and then next summer, next season, it will be back to Daniel Levy. It will either be that, or it will be that was luck. It wasn't Ange,
Yeah.
it wasn't Levy, it wasn't the players. It was how bad the competition is.
And then whatever happens, straight away he walks into a bin fire, because if we win it, he sacks Ange, and there's a whole load of people saying, how can you sack him? He's the most successful manager in our modern history. And if he doesn't sack him, they're saying, how can you not sack him? He finished 17th place. You're a fuckwit. So,
well, this is it. I think that there is a massive distinction between being the best manager in our history and the most successful. I think you can be the worst manager and also the most successful. But I think some people will confuse the two and say, no, he's the best manager because he won the trophy. He certainly isn't the best. He might be the most successful, but he certainly isn't the best.
Good point. Well put.
Mate, let's pivot back. This is the preview show. So how do Tottenham set up? I think can we both agree that the back five is pretty much guaranteed as we expect? And then also Bissouma and Bentancur are in there somewhere. How do you pick the next 4 or 5 players?
I do agree, except I just want to bring up one point because, and maybe it's total bollocks, but I've read this thing where I think Ange was asked the question, wasn't he? Oh, would you be tempted ever to use Porro as a creative midfielder? In which case, and I think he answered it and he said, no, never say never, or nothing's out of the question, or whatever. Is there a possibility that he could bring Spence in for Porro and play him in central midfield? I personally think it's unlikely. My instinct is absolutely yes. Stick with that back five. Stick with that back five that has done so well for us in the knockout games. And then yes, Bissouma and Bentancur absolutely nailed on. I'm glad you made that clear that that's the 7 you were talking about, because earlier on I thought you'd said, I feel like the midfield is nailed on. I absolutely have, and I'm very happy to be transparent about
midfield,
this.
I don't know what the
I absolutely have no idea how he's going to go for that third midfielder. The one thing I would say, or what I would hope is, I hope he doesn't try a formation change, because he tried that at Everton away, and that was the first time I watched Spurs in that first half, and I said, I actually don't know if these players are playing for him. And clearly they kind of are still. So it must have just been that they were so clueless about what they were supposed to be doing. I think he does have to stay with the same kind of way of playing. I don't know. Honestly, I guess you would look at what's happened so far and say he'll probably say Sarr and like I said, make it more stodgy. A stodge up, and Sarr has scored away. He has scored against Manchester United before. He has got legs. He's got an engine. But yeah, I don't know. Tell me, Sean, if you think something else might happen. I was really hoping that in one of those last 2 games, Micky Moore might have his best game and suddenly put a question in the manager's mind. But I don't think Micky is very confident at the moment.
Yeah, I don't know. I think that the notion of moving Pedro Porro forward would have been more. I would have been more on board it had Jed Spence's form not fallen off a cliff. I think that he's someone who's been a victim of Ange's favoritism a little bit, like a use me when you need me, not when you want me sort of thing. And so I think that at the moment, Jed Spence looks like someone who doesn't care. Now, if he suddenly gets picked, does that whole motivation come back in, and do we see a new version of Spence? That's an unknown for me, and I just I don't really want to see it. So for me, I think we need to stick to the tried and tested back four, and obviously Vicario, obviously Bissouma and Bentancur are straight in there. In terms of the top end of the pitch, this is where it gets a little bit tricky for me, because I don't mind if he goes with Pape Sarr, although I don't think Pape Sarr has been anything like the player that he was last season. Yeah, I think he's really got sloppy with his distribution. I think his and that's painful when he gives the ball away sloppily and unnecessarily. Then we get counted on, and I think the stats, I haven't looked into them, but I'm sure the stats would suggest that when he gets transitioned, when he gives the ball away, there's bad things have happened, because I've called it out so many times in the game, like, Pape, not again, and then we lose the goal. So that to me is a concern. However, I also think there's a conundrum on the left-hand side. I'd love to get your take on Sonny. I'm of the opinion that I'm a meritocracy guy. I think if you deserve it, then you get it. But if you don't, then you shouldn't, just because of history or nepotism or favoritism or anything else. And I do worry a little bit with the left wing conundrum, because I don't think Sonny's anywhere near his best. I don't think he's fully fit. I thought that against Aston Villa, the entire structure was, again, we shoehorned Micky Moore out to the right-hand side to give him minutes, but then the strategy was to go down the left entirely and give everything. I've said it before, like, here comes the big airplane, Sonny. Like, it was spoon-feeding him every ball so that
he looked a bit sharper. He looked a bit sharper than he had before his injury, I thought. A little bit in terms of pace, if nothing else.
Certainly in terms of pace, but then the distribution at the end was shocking a couple of times.
Yeah.
And I just wonder whether or not, he's the right call. And, but then I hear the argument. I'm sure the chat will say who else deserves it more than him. And it's a weird one, because there isn't that many people that are sort of screaming out for it. If you're going on work rate, and I believe, and I know I'm in a pool of very few people here, but I believe that Mathys Tel is a real talent. I think he works incredibly hard. And we spoke earlier about the lack of motivation of everybody else that's in the Premier League at the moment in our team, not caring because it's the Premier League and we've given up. He hasn't. Every game I see him, he's getting better. The work rate he puts in is phenomenal. And I see a real player there. And I also see a nice little relationship between him and Udogie that's emerging it may be because they forged that when in the French youth team. I don't know where you go. I probably would be, my preference would be Solanke in the 10, Richarlison in the 9, and then take your pick of the two of the wingers. Probably Johnson because he's a back post guy that can nick a goal if we go down the left with aplomb. But who do you put on the left? Is it Tel or Sonny? I would probably prefer to see Mathys Tel, but I think the club will go with Sonny.
Yes, so it never crossed my mind to play Richarlison in the 9. I don't think that's going to happen personally. I was actually going to say to you, but I'll answer it myself. I think the reason Richarlison hasn't got on the pitch in the last game is because he's going to start on Wednesday. I think he's going to start. I think the job he did in the semi-final, both legs, has shown Ange that playing this slightly more direct way helps Solanke having Richarlison with him to work the scraps off. So my instinct is that Richarlison is going to start. I do wonder, though, whether Sonny looking a little fresher in terms of pace may tempt Ange into playing Sonny on the right, Richarlison on the left, Sarr in the 3 in midfield with none of them playing in the 8-10 role, them just stodging it up in the middle, and us playing direct up towards Richarlison and Solanke. So Richarlison on the left, Solanke in the middle, and then Sonny from a wide right position trying to scrap around it. I wonder if that could happen. But it's also, that could work the other way and that Richarlison could play on the right, Sonny on the left. I personally think Sonny should not start this game. I think he should. I don't think he's played enough minutes. I think he should work as a threat off the bench. But I think Sonny will start the game.
On the right-hand side, is it a Brennan Johnson obvious?
I think Richarlison's going to start on the left. I do think Richarlison's going to start because otherwise, why wouldn't he have played in the last game? It doesn't make any sense unless he's got a knock. But I think he'll find a way to squeeze Sonny in as well. I don't know. In which case, it would be one of them on the right, one of them on the left, Sarr in the middle, and Solanke up front.
See, you know what? As much as everyone's cursing our luck, losing out on Maddison, losing out on Decky, Maddison's clearly a big blow on me. But I actually would make the argument that considering how bad Decky's been in the last couple of months, I'd make the argument that maybe there's a level of unpredictability to our setup now that even Tottenham fans can't agree on a front four that we all want to see. And if we can't agree and we spend all day long every day talking about Tottenham, then what chance does Amorim have of knowing what 11 he's going to see or what front four he's going to see? And does that affect... Amorim is a guy that does a bit of SWOT analysis. He is a guy that he'll keep to his structure, but the team, if everyone's fit, is dependent on who he's playing. And if he doesn't know, because we don't know, and maybe Ange doesn't even know yet, then, is there some, hidden benefit there to the fact that, for what it's worth, just quickly, I don't know if this is a complete red herring, but Maddison got on the plane today with a bag.
So did Will Lancashire. So they're taking everyone who's played.
Fair enough.
Berghvall was there as well. They're taking everyone who's played, so they're taking the whole squad. So I unfortunately can't. I'm desperate to read into that, but
yeah. Look, I don't know. I just hope that we pick the team that isn't based on any kind of romanticism. I hope that it's a merit-based team, and I'll let Ange decide what his version of merit looks like. But I really just hope that it's not. We have to play Sonny because he's the captain and he's told us that he's fit. Because in the past, he has said that he's fit. And then when his form was dropped off at the end of the season, he said, I've been playing injured all year. And I don't want that to happen again.
Yeah. The thing that makes me think that Richarlison's going to start as well as him not having played the last game or two is that we just suddenly in these knockout games, certainly the semi-final onwards, have been playing. Vicario's not been playing short from goal kicks at all. He's just kicking it long the whole time. So I think Ange has just said, right, this is how we're going to do it. We're going to not give up any chances stupidly at the back. We're going to play a bit more direct. And I think he likes Richarlison in that position. And actually, if you take the first leg against Bodo Glimt as an example, we were so much better in that first half when Richarlison was on the pitch than we were in the second half, where he took him off and I know why, because Richarlison had opportunities one-on-one against his fullback, and he thought, Tell will do better in those positions. And actually, at the same time as him taking Richarlison off, they took off their fullback and because they knew they were in trouble. So I personally think that's why Richarlison will start, but I think the romanticism, as you said, and I agree with you, I don't think it should be picked that way, but I think that's what will probably pick Son ahead of Johnson. And also there's an element of, where will Brennan Johnson really benefit from that direct style? If we're not just single, when we try and play Ange ball, we're pretty single-minded about just trying to get to the byline and cut it back to the opposition forward. And if we're not really getting the opportunity to do that as much, then Brennan Johnson doesn't offer you anything, really. I like him as a player more than a lot of people, and I know how young he is, and he's got a lot of growing still to do. I think he's still a raw talent. But in that instance, what you'd say, if you have Richarlison on the left and then he tries maybe pick Sonny on the right, or they swap around or whatever, there is an argument for me to say, in a situation where we get a good chance, would I want Sonny on it more than most of our other players in a big game like this? Actually, yes. So
what's interesting is I don't disagree with you, but of this season, the person that I have the most confidence of finishing is Brennan Johnson.
True, but he can only finish in two different areas: the inside right finish across the left into the left hand corner, kind of Harry Kane-esque, and the back post pullback.
But last season, I remember him having a couple of breakaway moments where he did get behind the back line of a high line. Not that we'll see much of that.
He scored on his debut that was disallowed.
Yeah,
against Sheffield United. Was it Sheffield United?
Yeah, it was.
Absolutely, technically unbelievable goal.
Yeah,
he's got it in. He's got it in him. I swear, he's going to be a great player for someone. If we hound him out, it'll be for someone else.
To work harder. I bring this out. This is. I always talk about show ponies.
Definitely.
I always talk about show ponies and workhorses. Right. A team needs a mixture of both. And for me, I feel like, where is it? Where is he? Have I still got the video? Yeah. This is Brennan Johnson. He's neither. He's more of a Shetland pony or something like this.
Dressage.
Yeah, the way he just sort of trots on the spot, running around. Yeah,
that's definitely him. That's definitely him when he has to kind of work backwards. But that's another thing. Yeah. That's another thing that I would put on Ange Postecoglou. He doesn't want his forwards to work backwards. That's why another reason why we concede so many goals at the back post, because none of our wide forwards are getting back. And it's like, Ange says to them both, you can be like Mo Salah and just stay up the pitch. Well, Mo Salah stays up the pitch because on the other side, they've got Cody Gakpo working his nuts off, or Luis Diaz working his nuts off to go backwards. And you make up another four and you don't allow them to get into those positions. Sorry, I'm back now on why Ange will. That's why Ange will lose his job. It's as simple as that.
Mo Salah is the sort of guy where you go, you know what? I don't want you tired because we'll get the ball to you and then you'll do what you do and you'll bang in 45 goals in a season. Brennan Johnson is not fit to lace Mo Salah's boots.
I like Brennan, but he's not Mo Salah as yet.
He's definitely not Mo Salah, 100%. So last question for you, my man, before we round off is, how do you see it going? Score prediction.
Well, I think I've said, I think it's going to be a stodge fest. Like, I agree with you. It would not surprise me at all if this goes down as the worst Europa League final in history. The fear I have, the fear I have over and above, I'm not allowed good things. And as my girlfriend calls it, I have a toxic relationship with this, controlling relationship with this football club. My fear is that Bruno Fernandes will stick one in the top corner and then they will just defend and we won't break them down. But if we can somehow get that first goal and make them have to come at us, then I think maybe we could pick them off. But I think I would not be surprised penalties. I would not be surprised at all.
Yeah.
And from there, like, my experience of being a Tottenham fan makes me wonder if it's the Onana script. Everyone's been laughing at Onana all day. But my glass half full thing says, when we bought Vicario, we were told he's an amazing penalty saver. And as far as I'm aware, he hasn't saved one for us yet. No. So it could be his time. It could be Tony Parks.
I really hope. I'm hoping for obviously I'm hoping for a 3 or 4-0. But if it does go to penalties, my confidence levels are not sensational. I just feel like there's a disaster on that whole script. I'm not even going to say it out loud, but the certain player that we've been talking about, whether he should or shouldn't be playing, I feel like if he had to step up for the winning penalty or something, I can just see it going a different direction. So let's hope it doesn't come to that. But Barnaby, Mate, it's been a fantastic introduction, mate. I've really, really enjoyed. Obviously, for those in the chat, I've never actually spoken to Barnaby before, apart from on DMs and things. So I really enjoyed the chemistry, mate. I hope everyone else did in the chat. Tell everyone what's coming up on your channel and what can people expect to find.
Yes, mate. Listen, thank you so much for having me on. Really appreciate it. What's coming up? Well, I'm going to be doing a little preview tomorrow with Ashmatic from Spurs Kings TV. That'll be at about, I'm recording it at 11, so I'll probably go up at lunchtime. And then I think on the day, I'm just going to spend all day getting drunk. So probably nothing on the day, but hopefully a drunken winning video. I'll do a live thing from a pub or something if we win. And then the fallout. And then over the summer, I tend to pivot a little more to kind of transfer talk, always starting with Spurs transfer talk and rumors and stuff like that, because frankly that's what the kids want to see. But as Spurs news comes in, I will of course be doing stuff. And yes, listen, mate, let's make this a regular thing for sure. Yeah, like you said to me earlier, there is a gap in the Tottenham space for some non kind of aggressive screaming of clickbait, and I like the fact that we are seemingly on a kind of similar angle in terms of being quite glass half full, but also probably weary of the realities of Spurs and how the business side of it works as well. Because it's never, like you said earlier, it's never black or white, and there's no simple solution. And I hate to say it, but even if we win on Wednesday, it'll feel like a solution, but it won't be in the long term. There's a lot of work to be done for sure.
A lot of work to be done. A lot of clickbait videos to come out throughout the summer. I'll keep my clickbait for the transfer views, news views and clues. Guys, I want to say massive thank you to everyone who's joined us. I think was there a super chat? I'm sorry, Maha Artist. I saw this at the start. I forgot to call it out. Thank you very much for your new member subscription. I appreciate the hopefully the ongoing relationship. Guys, I want to say please make sure you do get over to Barnaby's channel. Make sure you spend some over there and hit the subscribe button. And yeah, like I said, Barney and I are going to be doing once a week on my show and then on my channel, and then once over on Barnaby's as well. So look forward to seeing episode 2 of this over on Barnaby's, hopefully early next week, once we all get back from Bilbao, and hopefully we have a trophy success to
have an amazing time. Have an amazing time, mate.
Thank you, buddy. If my ticket comes through, we'll find out. Appreciate you all. Like, subscribe, and comment. And as always, bye-bye.